I know, I'm late. I promised these a couple of weeks ago, but lots of other things going on, lots of demands on my time. But finally, here they are. These are my 18mm AB miniatures Napoleonic Austrians, or at least the Austrian Infantry, as we've already had a look at the cavalry. If you haven't seen that video, there'll be a card above now. But in the meantime, here they are, Austrian Infantry. So again, these were painted a number of years ago now, at least probably a decade ago, I'd say. Originally they were based in much smaller units and single ranked on the bases for Empire, and then I decided to consolidate them into these a bit more aesthetically pleasing sized bases. Still play Empire with it if I want to, just fewer units. So before I could have represented a couple of divisions or more. Now, what you see before you hear a couple of brigades worth and an avant-garde brigade as well, based on the Grens and the Jaegers and so on. Recently flagged them as well. For a long time they didn't have flags. You'll notice a couple of the banner poles are actually bare and don't have the repeating colour scheme running up the pole, but I can always add that in later on the couple that don't. The unit sizes, some of them are a little bit off, like some of the battalions are smaller than others. That's because there were just fewer of those figures available when I had to consolidate them. Also, there's a little bit of a plethora of colours in the facings, so although we've got a couple of units here that are all got yellow and a couple have all got red, there are two different versions of blue, for example, for the German infantry at least. But we'll look at those when we go round. I did make the conscious choice, as we start at this end, to put the Hungarian infantry in shakoes, or at least the Austrian infantry shako anyway. There they are. And you can see there's two units or battalions there with yellow facings, and then a smaller one with blue at the back. So if I expand these, I'll have to add probably at least a base to the unit with blue facings, and then probably another unit, so it becomes a 2-battalion regiment. And that's the only Hungarians I've got in the unit. Given a mixture of flags for these as well. Slightly arbitrarily, I know there's a difference between the Liebesfahnen, Ordnungsfahnen, and I think I did look it up when I did it a couple of months ago. But if there's any sort of obvious historical inaccuracies, you'll have to forgive me on that front. But that is the Hungarians in shako, and then at the front here we've got two paired battalions of German infantry in their fairly distinct Austrian infantry helmet of the time. A couple of battalions there with the yellow facings at the front, and then a couple with red at the back. Been quite nice deployed in line like that. Again, AB castings, really, really nice. One thing I did find is I had an excess of command figures, which I think I mentioned about the French infantry, and when I consolidated those as well. So you can see that rather than having all the command figures on a single base, like at the front battalion here, I've maybe popped an extra officer or a drummer on one of the other stands within the battalion, just to try and use some of those figures. But there are some languishing in the box still in storage, but they can be used as useful carders for creating new battalions in the future, if and when I ever get around to doing that, of course. So that's some of the massed German infantry. Then at the front here you've got elements of what could be the avant-garde division's infantry brigade. So you've got a battalion of Grens on the right hand side here. Can't remember which Grens regiment I went for. This is based off the Aspen Essling orders of battle, and certainly the infantry were mostly for Rosenberg's 4th Corps at the time. And I can't remember which Jaeger battalion it is next to them either. But there's certainly a battalion of what I think is the I think it's either the Vienna Landwehr, actually on the order of battle it's the Mar Freiwilliger Landwehr, maybe the 2nd battalion of that group of Landwehr battalions. Some nice different variations in the AB casts there, and you can see at the front actually, in the paired skirmishes in front of the Grens, one pair I've painted as Hungarian Insurrectio, because I felt like it, and I had done the Hussars already, and there was a very small party, I think maybe about 140 or so, listed on the Nafziger order of battle. I didn't want to do them as a distinct unit, so I sort of blended them in to the wider skirmish screen that's available. A couple of pairs of skirmish bases for the Jaegers as well on this side, which is kind of nice. You'll notice most of the Austrian infantry units here don't have skirmishers at the moment, but largely because their skirmish capability, as far as I can understand it over time, was much, much more limited. I know they had attempted to inaugurate some reforms to put small parties of troops out, but they seem, as far as I can tell, to have been inefficient, ineffective, not very well trained in their role necessarily, so their value is probably negligible, so I haven't bothered painting up skirmishers for them. And then at the back there, actually, there's a nice alternative pose. You've got Austrian Infantry battalion standing with ordered arms. I quite like that one. But as you can see, there's only a single battalion in red facing to that colour, so I either need to do another battalion to match them, or I could make a 3-battalion regiment with the chaps in red to the other side of them. But yeah, nice dynamic figures. I kind of like the pill-sized bases for doing the skirmishers, and getting a pair on there. Pair seems about right, because that's how skirmishers were hopefully trying to operate, covering each other. And there you go, there's the Jaegers. Some of the figures from the Jaegers, I remember a long time ago, I got off eBay, and I think they were original masters, and I still have the ones I didn't use attached to a piece of cardboard, protected. But there were some fairly unique and original initial castings or master castings. I can't remember what they were called, but I did use some of them, but I can't remember which ones they are necessarily in this group. And actually some of those Jaegers have rifles and some have muskets, because I clearly mixed them in on the base. But anyway, I digress. And then at the end here you've got a few large battalions of the classic march attack pose of Austrian infantry. So you've got one with light or sky blue facings here. Again, I can't remember off the top of my head which regiments, because if I haven't read that information recently, I will forget it. They were supposed to represent. One with sort of apple green facings at the back here, and then one with sort of more mid or darker blue facings at the back. You can also tell the gap in between when I painted some of these figures, because a lot of them, as you look over them, are quite starkly white, even though there's a slight difference maybe between them and the cross belts. I think I've only done that because of the shadow of the undercoat, so I've kind of done it and used that to make the distinction, whereas I think if you look at particularly this battalion in blue at the back here, I've deliberately painted a different kind of off-white deck tan colour for the uniforms, such as many years later I've used more effectively on 28mm scale figures, and then kept the very actual, stark white colour for the cross belts in order to develop some contrast. But that's probably the way I would paint them now as well, in order to make the uniforms look different from the cross belts. But there's not a huge amount more I can say about these necessarily. You might be able to see some 10mm Romans and so on in the background as well. But that's all of the Austrian infantry, not the grenadiers actually, because those haven't been consolidated onto the new basing style. But there are at least enough there for 2 or 3 battalions worth. And in an ideal world, as I say, I would double out these regiments that are only single units or single battalions, so they could be in pairs. Alternatively, I could repaint the facings, but that would be somewhat of a faff to do actually, and some colours are harder to paint over than others. I have already considered doing that, so maybe they just stay as single battalion regiments in the near future, because again, time, I don't know when I'm going to get around to doing that. But like I say, certainly with a couple of small ones, I do have a decent number of spare figures still. I might bulk out some of those units and make them larger, and if I never get really carried away, add an extra battalion of Hungarians. But I'd certainly quite like to get the Grenadiers based up in this style as well, and paint up a handful of extras in order to fill in some gaps with those, and maybe make them a 4-battalion brigade in order to add to the collection. But that is the last of the videos, I think. Oh no, I haven't shown the Austrian artillery yet in command. And some of the other, maybe French artillery in command, but this is probably the last big video-ish, covering the big building blocks of my AB collection for 1809. Nominally, I remember start buying 1812 era Russians and things like that, so that I could then play 1813 campaign whenever I wanted to, but all of those are languishing unpainted, unfortunately. And yes, I know there's a problematic discussion to be had about German Austrian infantry's headgear in the later campaigns and when they switched over and what they were wearing, but I am in no mood to buy all these again and paint them in shakos, because actually the helmets give you some interest in painting them, visual interest and aesthetic interest, and it just breaks it up a bit, whereas when you're just painting black shakos on them, well, everyone's got black shakos, and it becomes a bit back-breaking when you're painting white uniforms without something to distract your attention at least. Anyway, that's all for now, and I'll wish you happy hobbying in the meantime.